Strixhaven spoilers have begun, and with 2 of the 5 factions having flavour revolving around performance and art, it's safe to say that the mechanics will follow suit. But how has Magic tackled these aspects of society in the past, and can you even come close to expressing creative endeavours in a fundamentally combat-based game? Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And Strixhaven previews are in full force. Everyone get on the never-ending hype train.
I mean, yeah, we had a couple of. We deliberately took a couple of weeks break, but yeah, no, the train's back in the station.
Choo choo, motherfuckers!
Choo choo, indeed.
So yeah, Strixhaven is on the horizon. It is coming out very soon. As the format we've kind of fallen into, we tend to do 3 episodes per main set release. So we do a storyline one once all the web fiction's out, we do a world building one, and we do a flavor picks one. This is none of those, but this episode is inspired by Strixhaven, a little bit like how we did for Kaldheim, where we spoke about sagas in one of our episodes in this little kind of release cluster, because sagas made a return on Kaldheim and spiritual successor and blah blah blah. You listen to the podcast, you've heard that episode, and if you haven't, go listen to that episode. This is going to be one of those episodes where we take a look at something in Magic that is kind of related to the newest set, and this one is kind of good to do leading up to the set because it's explicitly us talking about what's come before. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a little look at all of the performative and artistic representations in Magic's history, how they function on the card, because they seem to be making a bit of a statement in Strixhaven that at least 2 out of the 5 schools on Strixhaven, although it could be argued that more of them do this thing, 2 of the 5 schools are like humanities based if you're looking at school subjects. So we have the Prismari, who are the artists and dancers and performers and basically a catch-all for all the performative arts. And then we have the Silver Quill, which are like the English majors, but they're very leaning into the like reading and sort of like almost like poetry and prose aspect of it. So they kind of bleed over into the performance arts as well. So these 2 houses in Strixhaven, with the other 3 basically being maths, history, and science, we've kind of landed on for Witherbloom, are sort of doing justice for performance arts representation of Magic. And like this is something we've spoken about that we've wanted for a long time, right? To see in the game.
Absolutely. I mean, even the trailer, which I just watched today, it opens like a stage, and it's all the 5 different schools kind of pledging you to come to their college. It's kind of set up as like a comedy kind of skit kind of thing. So clearly this is the kind of window they want you to look in at. I get a very Glee feeling from this set.
Don't say that.
Glee back in the... I know,
oh,
I'm sorry.
Don't ruin it for me. I did not like Glee.
Okay. Well, it doesn't have to... Look, okay, Glee clubs are big in America. It doesn't have to be that you're represented by William Schuster or whatever. Like, fair enough. But it's the kind of vibe, the camaraderie, right? The collective performance camaraderie that we know coming from a theatre background. Like, I think that is what really resonates with me. And I think... I get, yeah, maybe Glee's the wrong way to say it, but it fills me with Glee. So,
sure, well, I mean, yeah, like, we met at university, at St. Mary's University. That used to be called University College because it had such a small student pool that it technically wasn't big enough just to be an all-out university, so that's why they called it University College. St. Mary's University in Twickenham is where you and I did our bachelor's degrees. And we both did drama and theatre, but we were in different, what was kind of called pathways. So I did drama and theatre arts, which was the very sort of straight down the line actors and directors course. And you did the physical theatre pathway, which was a bunch of movement wank.
Yeah, like clowning. Oi, fuck off. It was like... you know what? There's no coming back for the cool, whatever. Yeah.
Well, no, we
were the Ponzi wankers that pretended to be trees, and Annie was the front in the class that thought they were actually like, telling people.
Yeah, we were thespians. No, physical theatre. I guess the way because a lot of the tutors that we had came from like Eastern European theatre backgrounds, where it was all like suitcase theatre, which was like it was very clowning, very movement based, a lot of like using your body to tell the story as well as like having your stage presence. Whereas a lot of drama theatre arts was a lot of voice work as well. So that's kind of two. I mean, I did a lot of different pathways as well by virtue of the fact that I play instruments. So when I was studying, all of the other pathways did shows where it was kind of in vogue to use live music during your theatre performances.
God, there was such a little trend, yeah.
It was a real trend. So me and about like 4 or 5 other students that in my year, all from different pathways, essentially did all of each other's shows and were in all the different things. So I sat in on like physical theatre classes, and I sat in on applied theatre classes about half the time that I was doing my own drama course as well. Didn't get any extra credit for it, but fucking free labour, I suppose.
Well, I think it's funny because now looking at the course, I don't know why we've gone into a big deep dive on our university, but the physical theatre side and the theatre arts got merged into one course because we did like a crossover course as part of the lesson structure. So you do like 2 or 3 weeks working on the other pathway, and what they realized is that it brought out the best in both sides. So they were like, well, let's just maybe fuse these two vocations together, and then they can help inform each other. What I read into that was that physical theatre wasn't considered worth it, and they made a big song and dance going, yeah, no, we're combining the two pathways. We're not dissolving one of them at all. No, that's not happening.
Interesting. I didn't know they did that, but that's fine. But that's our background, and I think that we've said many times, if you are a long-time listener to this podcast, you'll have heard us talk about in a lot more in recent episodes, but also if you go back even like a year ago, one of the things that we wanted to see out of our characters and out of the planeswalkers mainly, but also a lot of the legendary creatures, was that we wanted to see like, well, what happens if you have a writer as a planeswalker, or why aren't actors represented, or like musicians really? And it's because the game, as like a broadly speaking game, is a combat based strategy game, right? So you have your creatures that smash in, your spells need to take down people's life totals. The way you lose the game is by having your life total come down to 0. And obviously things like dance and theatre and visual art doesn't naturally lend itself to those kind of combative states, right?
Yeah, we'll look at a few cards that very much try and do a bit of both, and you can kind of see where they're trying, but the mechanics and the flavour don't necessarily meet up like properly, because as you say, there are certain aspects to like dance of how do you turn dance into a combative card, right? I mean, I think there's also a lot of cards outside of creatures that maybe represent this better through, like, say, musical instruments or enchantments that maybe show off the flavour of performance and song maybe better than, say, creatures do. But yeah, like we've had a couple of planeswalkers that kind of sit on the edge of this.
Yeah, and we'll kind of get to those. So what we've done is we've looked through lots of card galleries and looked at a few stories as well. Scryfall is obviously a big help. As our usual caveat is, obviously, Magic lore and like card back catalog is infinite. Like, so we're not going to get everything. There are probably going to be a couple of things that we missed, and if we have missed anything, please let us know on our social media platforms that we'll plug at the end. But we've gone through and we've tried to see what kind of trends there are, what kind of things are represented and how they're represented, because it seems to me, and this is something we'll get into in the world building episode, is that Strixhaven is really leaning into the idea, even though that there are combat elements to it, because obviously there has to be, because that is the side of the game, but they seem to be moving to the completely other end of the spectrum, where it's a top-down design of, we want to have artists in the game. How do we make those cards for artists? Whereas a lot of what's happened up until now, even in sets that have been broadly top-down designed, where they do flavor first and then make the mechanics, broadly speaking, is that a lot of these cards seem to be bottom-up. So they're like, we have this mechanic, we want to do something with it, and then a game designer or world designer will go, oh, yeah, cool, how about we do this with the card visually then? And just so we can get that mechanic into the game. So it seems to be done the other way around. So yeah, we're just gonna, you've sort of broken it down into very loose categories of different sort of artistic endeavors, and we'll move through each one and kind of pick our little findings and our little research out of each category and talk about what we found.
Okay, well, so the first one, the obvious one, I think, is music/musicians.
Sure.
This is something we're going to see in Prismari a lot anyway, like specifically the head of the Prismari Commander deck precon is a thunder conductor.
Or
collector, if you read into the card, but yeah, which is a really cool idea. And I think when they talked about this in the brief, what do they call it? It's like it's a set release show.
The reveal video with Jimmy Wong. Jimmy Wong was on the Twitch show, and they did all the game designers. Yeah.
And they talk about how the orchestra has to perform outside because it's so loud and it creates essentially like thunderstorms, which I think is really cool. So yeah, that was one of the first ones, the obvious one of like songs throughout Magic, and it's probably one of the ones that we see the most of through a combination of performers, effects, and instruments themselves. Like there's actually quite a few of them throughout Magic, but they all have varying colours, they all have varying effects. So the most basic one, I'm sure you've had this as well, was musician. And this is from all the way back in Ice Age. 2 and a blue. It's got a cumulative upkeep of 1, and you tap it to put a music counter on target creature. During that creature's controller's upkeep, they pay 1 for each music counter on it, or they destroy the creature, which is cool. So the idea I think here mechanically is it's like entrancing. Is that the entrancing? That is a word, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the idea of like with like the Pied Piper of Hamelin kind of trope of where when you perform the music, the other person is under your is essentially under your control, right? And it's not until the song as it goes builds more and more, and you fall further and further deeper under its control, which I think is a cool idea. I think they've done this a few times with other things, similar things like Alluring Siren is another example, which is from as early as M11 of where you tap it to force a creature to attack, and that's this idea of mermaids out in the ocean, kind of calling sailors to their death, right? This idea of a lilting melody that entrances the senses and takes you away.
What I found with that as well, that mechanical idea of music being something that ensnares the senses and controls things, is that there are a lot of pipers in Magic. Things like Elvish Piper, Piper of the Swarm, which is literally the Pied Piper of Hamelin, which was found in Eldraine. Piper's Melody is a card, Satyr Piper, Tauren Piper, the Prismatic Piper. So like, it's a real like thing which they really lean on in Magic. But for the most part, they control either what zone creatures go into, or they control the attacking thing. A little bit like you were saying with Musician. So for example, Elvish Piper, Piper of the Swarm, and Piper's Melody put creatures from one zone into another in various ways. Like Elvish Piper gets it from your hand onto the battlefield. Piper's Melody puts something from your graveyard on top of your library. Piper of the Swarm, you can two black tap, sacrifice 3 rats, gain control of target creature, right? So it's this idea that to represent it on the battlefield, your music is making other people's creatures do things they don't want to do. Satyr Piper and Tauren Piper are 2. One's a Satyr Rogue and the other one's a Summon Minotaur. Both of them basically control what happens in the combat step. It's not completely consistent though, because then you have things like Discordant Piper, which is a black Satyr from the latest Theros block, and Prismatic Piper that have nothing to do with that mechanic. So it's not like and this is something that I think we'll see with a lot of these tropes where they clearly use the same idea in a few things, but not in others. It's not like with Archer, the creature type Archer, where they seem to have a very clear idea after like maybe the first couple of sets what a white Archer, a green Archer, and a black Archer do individually. And those tropes are carried through. With these ones, they seem to have kind of sort of found a groove and then not completely followed it through, which is what I hope they'll kind of stop doing from Strixhaven beyond,
Yeah, for sure. I think this idea of this call to arms aspect of a Piper is kind of, it makes sense, right? Because this is the thing, like, it's not necessarily at that point a performance as much as like a snake charmer, right? Like it's not you're I'm trying to think of like, because it's not, you're not doing it to an audience, right? Your audience is the thing you're controlling.
It's not performative at all. It's definitely used as you're trying to bring people to you. It's not for the benefit of anyone else. Lyres are also another thing, like Lyres, like little harps. That seems to be another sort of instrument that they really rely on. And again, a lot of lyres, whether they're artifacts or they're players of lyres, like you have elf lyre and elvish lyre, and like they all seem to do slightly different things, but it's also, again, it's like controlling combat stuff. Kind of a little bit basic. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't mind it. I think it's probably one of the better ways of them representing like the flavour of that. I say that in that entrancing idea, that idea of being victim to a magical song, because songs in magical songs in general typically are used kind of maliciously, right? It's the opposite way of thinking it is like, say, the Piper that makes all of your opponent's creatures block is kind of like your. It's almost like we'll get to war drums in a second, but it's kind of like that idea of charging out at the head of battle with your war horn, and it's kind of puts your opponents on edge, or it attracts all of their attention to you. That kind of idea, that does feel more performative, but it's still functional, right? It's not doing it as a form of entertainment. It's doing it as a military tactic, which again is showing that how Magic as a game kind of has to push this idea of music in a way that works within, as you say, combat or getting creatures into play. I don't understand why Discordant Piper makes a 0/1 white goat when it dies. That
No.
makes no sense at all.
It absolutely it makes no sense whatsoever. Like that is a classic example of where they went, we have this mechanic we need for the set. Okay, cool. We need to put it on a card. A Satyr Piper, they're a thing, aren't they? Let's make it a zombie because it's on Theros and they're a returned. Like, it was just, that was a very cobbled together design that I don't really understand. The only kind of music item that I found, and I know you've got a couple more to go through, but the only one that I found that wasn't just controlling creatures and how they act was the Panharmonicon.
Oh, yes. I'm glad you brought this one up.
Which is the tap 4 colorless artifact, which doubles up things as they enter the battlefield, or like triggers that would happen as things enter the battlefield. And the flavor text from that is really telling of how they sort of view the Panharmonicon. So it's all who listen hear their own song, a unique melody played just for them. So it's kind of cool. It's this idea that the music of this sort of musical artifact, which was created on Kaladesh and is kind of the peak of all music, actually enhances what your creatures do, as opposed to just controlling them and kind of ensnaring them in a malicious way.
Yeah, I mean, show me anyone who doesn't put their favorite jam on their headphones and doesn't bop as they're walking down the road, right? Like, people, this is the thing, this is the idea of using music as a celebration rather than as a tool. Like, very rarely do we see that in Magic, that it's not being used as for function. Like, the other two that I had for melody, which is what I had Panharmonicon come under when I was looking up lore. By the way, Scryfall lore section in the advanced is really cool for this kind of thing. You can put basically any word in it, or find it across flavor text within the text itself and within the card name. So it's a good way to kind of catch all, as it were. And the other one I had was Piper's Melody and then Reviving Melody. This idea of a song brings something back from the dead, which again is functional more than celebratory. It's less a performance and it's more of a necessity, right? It's a form of medicine, which is cool. Again, it's a different way of using a song. But yeah, Panharmonicon is the only way that seems to kind of play with this artistic nature of it, and the fact that it's music rather than just noise that's doing a thing, right? Like, it's easy to think that, say, if you're strumming on the Siren Song Lyre, it's that you're not the music is fine and dandy and everything, but it's the magic of the item that's entrancing the creature to tap it down. It's not necessarily like, hey, I played your favorite song. It's like, no, I could play anything on this, and it wouldn't matter.
Yeah, for sure. I think another character that kind of exemplifies the idea is Yisan, Wandering Bard.
Yes,
which
100%.
Like, his whole thing is that he has a lyre or a harp that can control creatures. It can summon them. He's on the new artwork from the Commander Collection Green, which is on Worldly Tutor, which is the tutor that you get to put a creature on top of your library. So that's like his whole thing. I don't know whether there's any real stories or any real sort of examples of him playing for like just pleasure or for the pleasure of others. Yeah.
There are only two other bards in the entirety of Magic that are listed as bard in their card title, and that's Jiraga Bard from Original Zendikar and Elvish Bard, which is a little older. The version I have is from 9th edition. I think it was from before then, because all of core sets were reprints at that point. Elvish Bard has the ability that all creatures able to block Elvish Bard do so. So that echoes that Piper effect of where it gains all of the attention and gets everyone to block that creature. Again, function over form a little. Jiraga Bard makes no sense. It just gives all of your allies vigilance, which makes no sense at all. And then this is the question, right? This is going to be a bugbear, I think, for a lot of these moving forwards, is creature type. Now, what would you think Yisan the Wandering Bard's creature type would be?
Well, I mean, there isn't one. Human,
rogue,
rogue.
Why? Same with Jiraga Bard. Rogue. I mean, Elvish Bard is shaman, and shaman makes more sense, right? Because it's using a natural thing. Music is natural sound, and you're applying some aspect of magic to it. Why to be a creative person or to use music, does it then make you a rogue?
It must be that thing of like rebellion and not conforming to rules, I suppose.
I mean, I guess any kind of artistry is going to be like, again, in the worlds of Magic, most of them are going to be fighting, right? Most of the time, it's not like Ravnica where you can sit around, put your knees up and have a coffee in your local bar. Like most planes, I guess, being a songwriter or something does put you outside the norm. You're not like a warrior or a soldier or a wizard. You are essentially a rogue in your profession.
Well, sort of, but it's just not clean enough, is it? Because the context in which they're using it is meant to be the thing of going, well, this person's crazy because they're an artist. But again, we'll see this in Strixhaven because we've already seen it on certain cards and flavor texts and things like that. Is that the Prismari and the Silverquill are not just these kind of chaotic, like, oh, we'll just do whatever we want and it'll be amazing. Like, both guilds are shown to be like to have practice in their craft. And
Hmm.
this is kind of a big worldview, I think, for a lot of people who maybe don't have creative hobbies themselves, who aren't that interested in playing music, or just, they're not really in that world. It's not just you just pick up a paintbrush and you're just like, yeah, I'm now an amazing artist. Like,
Expressionism. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
even to do the most seemingly basic shit takes a level of like dedication and
Hmm.
practice and
Practice,
determination,
right?
even if
Yeah.
that is to say you learn the high art of techniques to then throw them out the window. You need to know what it is that you're throwing out before you do it. And I think
Mm.
Rogues just, it just kind of paints the bard, as it is in D&D a little bit, as this kind of I'm a crazy bard who knows what I'm going to do. What you're going to do, mate, is you're going to sit in your bedroom for 10 hours practicing one scale, and then you're going to do that for the rest of your life. There's no adventures for you. Like, pick up the guitar and fucking
Oh, it's
learn it.
so true. It's so
Yeah.
true. If anything, you become more of a nerd. Like, so I know some music, like some music nerds that are like really like they're very, very talented at what they do, but they're like almost mathematical in their approach to it, right?
I speak from experience where I can tell you that when I learned how, so the first instrument I ever learned how to play was the clarinet, and I did that when I was like 12. And I was so bored of doing music theory, and then I learned other instruments, and I've there's about 5 or 6 now that I can kind of dabble on and do whatever else. As an adult, as a 30-year-old, I can't tell you how fucking fascinated and like inspired I am by jazz scales. That in a way that
Mm.
I was never ever bothered about when I was younger, but now I understand the importance of how it all fits together, and that is just as creative to me as anything else. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's rogues are an odd choice, I think. But
I mean, I was saying so the topic I was going to say. Well, what's an appropriate creature typing? I'm like, well, there isn't one, so why not make one? You've just added noble, peasant, and warlock with the new D&D set coming out. If you don't give us a fucking bard creature type, I am going to flip. Because like, why
yeah,
would you give us? Why would you differentiate between a warlock, a shaman, and a wizard, which for all intents and purposes are all the same kind of thing? I mean, I know that in D&D there's a conversation about shamans are like of natural proficiency, whereas wizards had to like learn it. They had to like go and teach. Like they're not naturally imbued with the magic themselves. They had to go and
no,
like go and get a degree in it. Which I can understand the differentiation. So if you've got that, why not give us a bard creature type when? And maybe this would have been the right set to drop it. I don't think they will in Strixhaven. I think they're sticking to the standard formats. But I would be interested to see if they do attempt it in the D&D set. 'Cause it's the perfect place, right, to get a bard creature type that does something new. Maybe not even something new, but at least homogenizes the idea of music as a practice, as a magical practice within the game that works practically. Because the only three that I could find of actual music that's people playing music to a audience are all from unsets. And there's one in each of them. One in Unglued, I mean, there probably are more out there, but as in the three I found was Clam Session from Unglued, Land Aid 04, which hilarious, from Unhinged, and then the Hammerfest Boomtacular from Unstable. Yeah, okay, there's a lot of different song. There's a couple of other song cards in unsets that make you sing a song, which is obviously that's kind of plays into the unflavor. The idea of Land Aid is that, again, if you sing a song while you're searching the entire time for the land, then you untap that land, that kind of thing. Hammerfest Spectacular makes no sense towards music whatsoever. Like, it doesn't even try and hint at it. It's just whenever you cast another spell that has the same watermark as the Hammerfest Spectacular, it does some damage. So obviously, like, the party's getting bigger. So I do like the fact that they do play into this a little bit with the unsets. It's annoying that the closest we get to actual audience performances for music is in unsets, because that's officially like not canon and deliberately parodying. And it's like, well, why does it have to be a parody? Why can't you have like, like you have like Plain Wide Celebration, for example, was this big kind of event culmination of the end of War of the Spark, when everyone's happy and everything's been
Sure.
solved. Why isn't there like a festival? Like, I would love to see like a land that happened to be like, say, maybe a musical stage. We've already seen a theatrical stage. Maybe we could also now get a musical stage as a land. And then again, what would they do with it? How would they work with it?
I suppose the only one which I think comes close to that is there is a card from Kaladesh called Fairgrounds Trumpeter. Fairgrounds Trumpeter is 2 and a green for a 2/2 elephant. And it's at the beginning of each end step, if a 1/1 counter was placed on a permanent under your controller's turn, put a 1/1 counter on Fairgrounds Trumpeter, right? So it's 1/1 counter synergies. The flavor text reads: the louder the elephant trumpeted, the more the crowd cheered, and the more the crowd and the louder the elephant trumpeted, the more the crowd cheered, and the more the crowd cheered. Oh, ... the louder the elephant trumpeted. Right, sorry.
Yeah,
That took me a couple of seconds to read that flavor text and actually kind of
they
figure out
got
what
you.
it's saying. Yeah, it was a bit
They
weird.
baffled you.
Obviously, the trumpeter idea is to do with the fact that he's an elephant, but it is the idea of, like, I actually quite like Dragobard because
Mm.
the idea of giving things vigilance is like a bolstering. It's like how ancient armies used to go to battle, or not even that ancient, like right up until like the sort of World War One, you'd have like drummers in armies, or like pipers, or whatever else. Like the kind of army band, the marching band, is a trope of many, like a sports event across the world, for example. So it's bolstering and it's, invigorating. I think we need more of that and less of the, come with me, I'm the Pied Piper, because it's
Yeah,
just that's played out, right?
for sure. I mean, there's a couple of examples that are a little bit different to that. So, Elvish Lyrist and Devout Harpist are both enchantment destruction effects, which I like this idea of where you play a song to break a spell. It's almost like the opposite effect of where you have enchanting melody, which is literally a card, this idea of a song taking you over. I like the idea of using a song to break someone's enchantment over you, which is quite a nice idea. So I guess it can be used mechanically in both directions.
I agree. Why were they lyrists, though? The lyre
Yeah.
is so
Yeah,
many
that's
liars.
soothing, right? It's just like, I know. I mean, I guess because the opposite side, you have things like Goblin War Drums, right? That makes it so your creatures can't be blocked except by two or more creatures, as it sits as an enchantment. This idea, again, this piping effect, this war drum, literally it's called war drums. I don't know why.
You also have the card called War Cadence, which is a very similar effect as well.
Precisely, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of taking real world music as in a combative sense, and then applying it to a magic card. But then you've also got something like, say, Springleaf Drum, which taps. You tap itself and an untapped creature to add a mana to your mana pool. Now that's one of the few times we see celebration, and yes, it's one of the weird goblins from Lorwyn doing it, but I'd like the idea. I mean, the thing is, the way it presents it is that he goes around hitting different things to get the different sounds from them. I'm like, that's probably as close as we're going to get to like a musician drummer.
I will also point out that card was reprinted in a Theros block, which had a satyr banging a big Springleaf drum.
Yes. Yeah, so they do have them every now and again of where they're doing it not just for the sense of... I mean, this is a really good segue because Theros does this very well of where they have that celebratory aspect. The bugbear with Theros is that they don't lean into it half as much as they could have done, considering, there is supposed to be the Great Revel, and there's not actually that much performative satyrs. I mean, there are a couple. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple, because you get when I started looking at, say, dancers, I found a few different ones from Theros. You have Careless Celebrant, Scholar Grove Dancer, and Gallia of the Endless Dance, who are all various. They show themselves dancing on the cards, but then their actual abilities themselves are completely different.
I would also argue that those dancing that's not like a practiced art form dance in the same way that if you learn like ballet or tap or freestyle or classical or whatever else, that's them partying, that's them in a revel. And that does seem to sort of be the way that they've kind of gone. There are other cards as well. There's things like Bone Dancer is another one, but all these dancing things, or Dance of Many and then Dance of the Manse, are like effects which things do. But again, they're like ritualistic, and that's something that I found with a lot of the dance stuff, is that in the same way that the music is to kind of ensnare the senses, the dance cards, or cards that use dancing as a trope, are usually there to have the character and whatever effect they have be like emboldened, or it's shown sort of like, I don't know, it's a ritual rather than a practiced art form, I guess.
Yeah, Verundan Enchantress is a perfect example of this. It's the whenever you play an enchantment spell, you draw a card on a 0/2, and the flavor text is each spell has its own song, and the Enchantress knows the dance for each, which is showing that she's not performing. I mean, as much as she's probably enjoying it, it's not for someone to look at and go, "Oh, that's beautiful," which, for all intents and purposes, it probably would be, but it's not being used again in a performative sense. It's being used in a perfunctory sense, and I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't know necessarily what effects they could apply to a dancer who was doing it just for the funsies, but I do like the idea that, say, rummaging. So Oread of Mountain's Blaze also talks about how the flame wraps, she dances a burning swath amid the clouds. I like this idea of it's two in a red, discard a card, draw a card. This idea of as she's dancing, she's like, getting rid of her cares and worries whilst building this is the thing, building what? I mean, I guess like exuberance, like happiness. I mean, like that. None of that seems particularly combative. But again, she's not doing it for other people. It seems to be she's enjoying dancing, and then it has this, this effect within the game of discarding a card, drawing a card. I don't mind that idea of this carelessness kind of or carefree attitude when it comes to dancing, kind of being this discard a card and then you gain something from it. I would like this almost like an anthemic effect a bit more, but I wouldn't want it to feel like it's being used to cause conflict, but it's being used to generate good feeling and goodwill and camaraderie. Because we just don't get to see that. Even Gallia's like, bless her, she looks like she's having fun and she's fucking strong arming someone under her armpit, for God's sake.
Yeah, the Johannes Voss artwork's very, very cool.
Yeah.
What I will say is that out of all of the different sort of artistic vocations that we're talking about today, of all the ones that are probably the best suited for fighting and have creatures fighting each other, dance is the one. And so I kind of don't mind it too much, because obviously you have a lot of like martial artists kind of crossovers with dance as well. So the idea that, you're practicing forms and your movements have to be fluid, or they have to be purposeful in the same way that you would if you were learning, like flamenco or ballet or whatever. And there's a couple of really nice little crossovers. The one that I'm looking at is Sickle Dancer, which is 2 colorless and a black for a 3/2 human warrior from Battle Bond. And it's whenever Sickle Dancer attacks, if your team controls another warrior, Sickle Dancer gets +1/+1 till end of turn. And the flavor text reads, I lead, destruction follows. So going full into this dance motif, she has to have a partner if she wants to do things. She has to have another warrior for her movements to become even better, which shows that there's this kind of, it takes 2 to tango idea. The I lead, destruction follows has really nice kind of dance connotations of leading. Someone leads, the dance if you're in a pair or whatever. So I think this one out of all of them, I don't mind so much that in Magic they haven't made an effort to be like, well, why isn't there a ballet dancer planeswalker? It's like, well, that kind of idea is probably better represented than others. It's just, again, it's just not always the most consistent, and I would I think you look at something like Core Spirit Dancer, or a lot of these kind of like shamans or oracle kind of figures in Magic, where part of their kind of ritual is that they move around and they dance. I kind of wish that they were maybe, again, a bit more formalized across the sets as to what they do, because it just seems to be that they just slap that name on whatever kind of creature they have, at the time. I don't know. It seems a little bit disjointed to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think even certain times, like I'm trying to remember what the card is now because it's just drifted across my my mind. It was a pump spell from Theros, where the artwork is a someone who's got like ribbons and fabric, and they're dancing in a way that makes the ribbon look like Hydra heads. And I'm like, that's cool, right? Because that's using a method of dance in a way that we haven't seen before. It's like distracting, right? I mean, even like martial arts in general, I mean, it's literally in the name. Like there is an aspect of performance to it, right? Like even things like Master of Pearls or whatever has this almost like graceful aspect as they're commanding all of these like pearls dancing around them. So there is some wiggle room for sure. I would look. I mean, considering Prismari and Silverquill are kind of like word and music based, I don't necessarily know if we're going to see it like immediately, but I wouldn't mind seeing
I think Prismari are much broader than music, I think, because they have visual arts in there, they have actors. One of the deans is a like aerialist, so I think
I suppose the gym.
They have it all encompassed.
Okay, good. So yeah, maybe we will see some more. I'll have to double check what the Jin's ability is to see if it ties closely to it. But again, it's a tough one, right? Because a way of dancing, if that's the way you channel your mana, it could be expressed in any number of different ways based on who and what you are and where you are and that kind of thing and what you're trying to do. The dancing isn't necessarily the mechanic. The dancing is the means for the mechanic kind of thing, which is why I guess maybe sometimes it's not made top down of like, oh, how do we make a mechanic that feels like dancing? It's like, oh, well, no, this person's doing this thing and we can make them a dancer because it works in the flavor of the card and the mechanic, right?
There is one card which explicitly is a dance, and that is Macabre Waltz, which is 1 colorless and a black. For a sorcery, return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand, then discard a card. And the flavor text is, Liliana is never one to follow someone else's lead. And the artwork by William Murray is Liliana dancing with a corpse.
Yeah, the original artwork from Dissension by Jim Murray is not much better. In fact, it's one of the more egregious kind of like,
for sure,
God, that's not an art card. Yeah.
It's two skinned and bloodied corpses in a well doing a dance. It's
Yeah,
horrifying.
it
Yeah.
does sound as bad as it is, but again, that's the play on the words, right? Because they're not done. I mean, maybe Liliana is. I'm looking at Liliana, and she's definitely enjoying herself, having a little boogie there. But yeah, that's maybe not the best representation of dance in Magic. But it's also one of the few times they actually mention like an actual type of dance, right? Waltz.
Style,
Like you
yeah.
don't get like foxtrot or anything like that in anything else.
Which, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we move on to stage theatre and actors. It's not like a lot of these planes don't have backgrounds in their aesthetic and their setting that don't have traditions in performing arts and performance. This is something that I think this is why I think it's the big missed opportunity in Magic up until now, that they haven't explored this idea, because every society and every civilization has art and performance that we know about and is quantifiably, like, a lot of it is written down. And I think before we start recording this episode, you asked me where's the line with what's performance and what isn't performance, or art in general. And the answer is, as soon as the first cave person picked up a pigment and wiped it on a wall, that was immediately art. Like, it's been around for as long as humans have been able to communicate with each other. It's part of the reason that we've developed a language as much as we have, is because we had an ear for music and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's just a really missed opportunity in dancing, especially. If you look at planes like Innistrad and Fiora, which, Innistrad explicitly mentions balls and parties that the vampires throw and masquerades. Why haven't we seen?
Why do we see any of it? Right?
Yeah, more cards that literally represent that in one way or another. I think we've got Steinsia Masquerade, which is a vampire pump spell, and that's about it. There's a vampire aerialist card as well, which sort of falls into that category.
Good.
But
Yeah, I'm glad we got to that, because that's one of this is a really good example of where the mechanics don't represent the artwork at all. I think it's really cool. It's a really cool artwork. It's deliberately upside down, so it looks strange because you're seeing it from the wrong perspective. But none of the
Bloodthirsty
cards.
Aerialist is the card.
Yeah, none of the abilities, which is it has flying, and whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Those are all just vampire abilities. They have nothing to do with the fact it's an aerialist. And guess what creature type it is again, Andy?
It's a vampire rogue.
It's a fucking rogue, yeah. So again, maybe that's really indicative of, yeah, cool. It's you've represented a performer on a card, but all you've done is given it the same vampire abilities. The fact that it's a performer has nothing to do with what it does as a card. It's just the added the flavor on top of, which is kind of, again, maybe our issue. Compare that to, say, Acrobat, which automatically great card. And this is going to be moving into what I think we probably have quite a lot to discuss about, which is Rakdos, because the Rakdos cult does performance. I mean, obviously with the latest iteration, there was a massive focus on the show, right? That we've got you've got Jury, we've got Judith. Like, most of the legends are based around this performance aspect. And I think if you compare Acrobat to Bloodthirsty Aerialist, you get a really good sense of, okay, again, it's a human rogue, whatever. We'll get to the spectacle bit in a second, but what I like about Acrobat is one of its abilities is red. Acrobat gets +2/-2 until end of turn, and because it's a trapeze artist, I like the idea of it performing a daring thing of, like, where it swings around the rope, or it does like a spin or a jump or something, and it's dangerous, right? It gets the -2 because it's dangerous, but it gets the +2 because it's more exuberant. It looks amazing. There is a chance of it killing, of hurting themselves and falling to their death, but that's worth it, right? And that's the red. It's the red activation cost, and that's kind of like the perfect way. I'm like, cool. You're actually representing a performance, a move. That person's doing an aerial move, and it's represented in a line of text as a mechanic on the card, which I think is a much better way to do it than just to go, yeah, cool, it's a vampire and it has a vampire ability, but hey, it's also a performer.
Yeah, the Rakdos are an interesting one. I was thinking about this as well today, looking through a lot of the Rakdos cards from all three big Ravnica sets. And also, like, cards that began things like Commander Legends. Like, we had Blim Comedic Genius was also, along with Jury, Master of the View in Commander Legends.
Yes, of
and
course.
They did a really good job. Yeah, you're right. So Dissension and the original Ravnica block, they were very much sort of sadist cult, and they had, like, gestury aesthetics a little bit. But I was actually, funnily enough, I was looking through a big card image gallery of a lot of the first Ravnica set today, and a lot of the guilds and their aesthetic was still very generic fantasy with a little bit of flavor involved. And it wasn't until Return to Ravnica where they really made them know this is what Ravnica looks like going forwards. And the Rakdos cult started to become a bit more performance-based. And then in the latest one, Guilds of Ravnica, Ravnica Allegiance, they really transitioned from Hellraiser sadist cult into theatre of horrors performing and artists that had a bit of a like whips and chains aesthetic to them. And this is something that we said before. They're definitely on their way there to being like the representation of theatre and performance in Magic as far as the cards go. I still feel, however, with their general shtick and all of their like abilities that are kind of those are attributed to the Rakdos to kind of balance out the set mechanically, that it's still they went, we need them to do this thing, and then we think about how their performers a little bit sort of afterwards. So it's all, their whole thing is that the performance hurts the audience as much as it hurts them, and it's pain for pleasure kind of ideals, and it's kind of building on this idea that, you know, no great art can just come from out without being a little bit painful as well. And, you know, so a lot of the abilities are like that, and I kind of feel that it works for them, but you couldn't necessarily you couldn't make any of their abilities a trope of all like poets moving forwards, right? Or all dancers moving forwards. They are Rakdos cards.
It's a Rakdos theme ability rather than a performer's theme ability. They just happen to be performers within the Rakdos,
And don't get me wrong, like, you have to do that for every set. It'd be very weird just to make every set exactly the same. So that's not necessarily a dig. It's just like, it's just that the first thing that we see from this kind of trope in a big sort of guildy, this is a whole section of the game kind of way, is still very hyper stylized. Do you know what I mean?
Because I mean, I do like the idea of spectacle in general. Like, so I wrote down that it's the idea of once the performance has started, in brackets, damage has been dealt, which is obviously what spectacle is. The show can start in gusto, so it either reduces the cost of it, or the effect is bigger. The players come out quicker, bigger. There's more bravado. Like, I like that idea from a flavor point of view. Like, it works in my mind, but a lot of the cards are still just generic Rakdos-y cards of where, you know, they do a normal thing. I think Acrobat's the only one that maybe has a slight nod specifically to a performance aspect as it's continually doing it. Like things like, say, Dagger Juggler, I think it is. Blade Juggler. It's just your typical draw a card, lose a life thing. And it makes sense because, the performance is cool, but you might nick yourself, you know, as you're juggling knives. It still is a stretch, you know, it doesn't necessarily, it's not the performance informing the card, it's the card informing the performance. Which I don't think is a bad thing at all.
Another good example of that is the card Showstopper, which is 1 black-red for an instant that reads, until end of turn, creatures you control gain, when this creature dies, it deals 2 damage to target creature an opponent controls. The artwork by Steve Prescott is 3 Rakdos clowns exploding on stage as they do the big finish to their show, which is great. You know, it's a very Rakdos thing. And the flavor text reads, the audience quickly realized a few things. It wasn't a magic trick, there wasn't candy in there, and they'll need new clothes. Great card.
That is great, right? And
fantastic.
That's the flavor text and everything, and it wraps it all up nicely in a bow. Yeah,
but
I like it a lot.
Yeah, that's not a thing that that jesters across the multiverse do. That's a thing that Rakdos jesters do.
That's not your casual jester in Eldraine. It's like, were they supposed to explode? Oh no, he learnt that in Ravnica. Yeah, we should have told him.
An interesting corner case I just want to touch on very quickly. Sorry, just very quickly.
Please do.
Is Blim Comedic Genius. Because Blim Comedic Genius is a 2 black-red for a legendary creature imp. Flying, whenever Blim Comedic Genius deals combat damage to a player, that player gains control of target permanent you control. Then each player loses life and discards a card equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own, 4/3. So the character of Blim is a Rakdos comedian, and I think we've spoken about them before when we did our Commander Legends episodes. And obviously comedy is almost way harder than anything else to try and get across in the kind of abstract nature of like, how does a card function? And I think the way they went down at that road is by making him give like practical jokes. Like, he's giving you permanents that are going to fuck you over. It's like, here's a gift. And then like the pie comes out of the present. He's like giving you like an Acme cartoon and hits you in the face. So I get that mechanically, but that's not necessarily, it's almost there. It's not quite a comedian telling jokes, it's a prankster pulling a prank. Do you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely.
So it's
like captive audience, right? Like, Rakdos gave us the Rakdos Guild gave us 2 very cool cards. Theatre of Horrors, which the first time we've seen like a theatre setting outside of a card that I'm sure we'll talk about in a second, that is a flavour home run in and of itself. And also Captive Audience. Now, Captive Audience, I get it. You're from the point of view of an audience member watching the Rakdos show, and the Rakdos show has various different finales of bad things happening, you know, to you, which is great, but it's not really representing like what kind of performance makes a player discard their hand or create 10 zombies or lose 10 life. Like, it doesn't as much as it's a cool idea and a cool concept and a nice punisher effect, and you do feel like you are watching a Rakdos show unfold in front of you. It's not the show that's necessarily, I mean, it is, but it isn't. You're not seeing the show you're seeing the audience's reaction to the show, which is cool, and it's a very cool perspective, and I'm glad they did it, because it's one of the few ways that they've actually shown people specifically in a theatre environment watching the show from their point of view. So I do like that they did it, but again, mechanically, is it really telling the story so succinctly and can that translate into a captive audience from another plane? No, not at all. It doesn't necessarily carry, like, the Rakdos feeling is or the whole performance aspect of Rakdos still feels like it's Rakdos informing the performance, not performance informing Rakdos as a view. So yeah, I mean, one of my favorite ones from this, however, is Footlit Fiend, which is fantastic because it talks about it being a little stagehand, and what I love is that you sacrifice it to deal a damage. So basically, the stagehand does all the hard work, so the spectacle can happen. And I'm coming from a theatre background as a runner, I was going to do all the nonsense for all of the actors that are, like, in the year above you. Yeah, like there's lots. I do like the fact they gave a little nod that there's a lot of people behind the scenes that make the show work. Right? It's not just oh, the performance happens regardless. It's like no. It does give a little nod to the fact there are people outside that are helping. There's someone holding that spotlight. There's someone running doing the music for the show. That kind of thing. I thought that was quite clever. Flavorfully, I think it worked really well. Again, it's slightly outside of the performance aspect, even if it is building that feeling and a flavor point of view a bit better.
Cool. All right. Well, if we're moving on from the Rakdos, I will just do a little segue with Judith the Scourge Diva, who is the kind of Rakdos champion, if you like, in the Guilds of Ravnica era, because her ability, which is whenever a creature dies, you deal damage to something, is very referential to another card, which is, for my money, probably the most famous and yet most nonsensical out of all Magic cards that reference art and artists, and that is Blood Artist. What the fuck is going on with Blood Artist as a card, Nathan?
Yeah, it's funny because you said this to me, I think it was yesterday when we were talking about this, and you're like, how is Blood Artist representing art? And I was like, because the card itself is really cool. Right, everything about it, the artwork, the flavor text, everything that's going on within it is so cool. It's almost distracting from the fact that it doesn't represent itself at all in what it's doing. I get that I get that it's a vampire, so the idea of other creatures dying gives you a benefit and your opponents a loss. But beyond, I guess he's painting with blood, so that hurts you.
So the flavor text on it reads, great art can never be created without great suffering. So again, we mentioned this just a little bit earlier. There's this idea that, and actually it's something which a lot of artists in all mediums kind of debate, because it is a little bit toxic as an ideology, but it's definitely something that is in the artistic circles, of that you need to suffer or kind of go through some sort of pain or trauma that you can channel into your art to either make it more authentic or to give it some sort of deeper meaning that kind of, is viscerally felt by the audience or the viewer, like even after you've stopped creating the art, blah, 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 blah. A lot of it is a lot of bullshit, to be honest, and there's just a little bit of self-flagration. I think that's the word, right? But yeah, that's the kind of concept. So I think what happened here, and this is another one of those cards where someone went, we've got this idea for a vampire in this set, which is whenever something dies, because there's like a lot of sacrifice effects in this set, and blah, 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 you can channel that into value by gaining life and pinging something else. And then they went, all right, so it's a vampire. We've got a lot of vampires which have lifelink and all this kind of stuff. Got to come up for a different angle for this card. And then someone said, ooh, what if it's a painter? It's a vampire, like vampires paint with blood. That's a cool thing. And someone went, yeah, that's a really cool thing. And then they kind of did it that way, and then they did the flavor text to kind of tie it all together. But it's just... It is definitely one thing to have, like, I just kind of feel, and this is the overarching thing that we said, I feel like the flavor of a lot of these cards is actually very good. It kind of sounds like we're being a little bit bitchy about a lot of these cards, but the flavor is very nice. The Vortho side of it is strong. The Mel side of it is the thing that's lacking, right? So there's a lot of Vortho-y, this is the story of what the card is meant to be doing, but the Mel design aspect just isn't quite there with a lot of this stuff, and I think that's kind of what's letting a few of these cards down. But yeah, it was a thought that popped into my head yesterday, and yeah, I did say to you, I was like, why is Blood Artist an artist? What's it doing? That's an artist. Like,
yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Well, it's like funny because also, like, on the flip side, you've got someone like Nin the Pain Artist, who talks about like the victim being an instrument that needs tuning. And I'm like, that's cool. But it's almost like artist is almost like an air quotes. It's like, is that an artist? No, of course not. And it's almost exactly the same as blood artist. The only difference is blood artist has a painting in the picture, but it's got that same idea of is it quote unquote artist at that point? Like, I mean, again, it's all about interpretation. But if you compare that to say like spontaneous artist from I believe it's Kaladesh. I don't think it's Ether Revolt. It's a 3/3 for 3 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, you get an energy counter, and then you can pay an energy counter to give target creature haste until end of turn. Now, the flavor text is about graffiti. Graffiti of the leaking spire symbol is found whenever renegades have been. And I like this idea. This idea that this again, artist, and this isn't even in air quotes, this artist is someone who, again, is a rogue. I mean, fight me. This is a hill I'm going to die on. But I like the idea that obviously there's a rebellious nature to a graffiti artist. The idea that it comes with this energy, this vim, this need to revolutionize, to have to paint themselves, like to go and graffiti like again on the consulate like wall is very expressive. Okay, yeah, you could argue that it's illegal or whatever, but I like the idea that the energy that it gets from this can then spurn other people to be quicker and to do like that haste idea of, again, it's not exactly a perfect analog, but it speaks more mechanically from an artistic point of view. Again, the flavor text does tie it all together than say either of the other two cards do from a mechanic point of view, even if the flavor of those two cards is maybe stronger. The Vorthos side, that this does tie the Mel into it a bit more, even if it is more of a generic ability.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. Kaladesh as a whole plane was actually for a plane that was about inventors and like sort of like practical vocations, almost like people who you had like drag racers and engineers and all this kind of stuff. It was surprisingly full of artisanal things. Like Indomitable Creativity is another card as well, which is X red red red. For a sorcery that is destroy X target artifacts and or creatures. For each permanent you destroy this way, his controller reveals cards on the top of his or her library until an artifact or creature card is revealed and exiles that card. Those players put exiled cards onto the battlefield and then shuffle their libraries. And the artwork by Durachenko Alexander is insanely cool. Again, it's another graffiti artist, and it's a rogue graffiti artist putting the sigil onto the wall. So the same sort of idea. And the effect of the card is that it's, again, this sort of shaking up of the status quo idea, very much like the cards you were talking about. And it's just amazing. And this is one of those cards, and I think Kaladesh in general actually had a really good matchup of the Mel and the Vorthos to create the flavour of a lot of artisanal cards as well. And it's just kind of odd that it comes from the sort of very mechanical plane. And I wonder if that's because I think they started to hit on with things like Kaladesh, that actually the way that you do artists and artisanal stuff in Magic isn't necessarily to make them combative, but to make them an effect. So another card that I want to talk about, and this we actually had a little sort of like discussion about this pre-record about whether Saheeli, the Planeswalker Saheeli, could be considered an artist because she's an artificer. An artificer? I never had artificer.
There we go.
I never know how to say that word. So, but she has
all
a
words
card.
sound weird when you slow them down. Don't worry.
Yeah. So, but she has a card called Saheeli's Artistry, which is it's 4 blue for a sorcery card that says choose one or both. Create a token that's a copy of target artifact. Create a token that's a copy of target creature, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. And the flavor text reads, from the first touch, I know exactly what the metal wants to be. Now, she's not performing. It's true. She's not necessarily doing it to an audience or whatever else, but she's in the process of creation. And she's what I see artificers as, especially on planes like Kaladesh, and engineers and inventors as well, is that they're sculptors essentially and architects of things. Like they're making something new out of the ideas in their head, and they're using the skills that they're given to do so, which is what art is. It's just that it makes it practical. And for the mechanic of the game, to say very much like Indomitable Creativity, it's about growing and creating a board state that you want to see, almost sometimes from nothing. Almost like you take one thing and it becomes like, or you create an idea out of thin air, or you change, you get inspired by something else and you change it up. And this is where I think things start to move from, oh well, the dancer is like a martial artist, or oh, the jester explodes because that's what jesters do. Like, it's like, no, this is, for the plane that it's on and for the type of thing that it's trying to do, I think it just matches up very nicely. And this is the kind of thing that I hope we see a bit more of in Strixhaven. This idea that, throwing a fireball might look visually very nice, but actually it's about creating a permanent type, or changing something into something else in a creative way. I just think it's very cool.
Well, I think even the story, because we've both read the first chapter of the main story that's just released, and I liked the way they described how Will and Rowan's magic is combining into a thing that's like this idea of creatively, but this again is what Strixhaven is going to be about, right? It's not about just doing it for the functionality. It's going to do it with the bravado, with the flair, the ability to show off. Like as you were saying about Kaladesh, like the whole point of that set was it was the Inventors Fair, right? All of these different artificers were going there to create the coolest looking. I mean, look at the invention cards. Some of them are just gaudy for the sake of being gaudy because they know they were there to show off their artistry, right? And even in Cowtime, you see this with how the dwarves create their weapons. There's a degree of it's not even, it isn't like obtusely creative thing. It's, you are literally creating it, and it is a bit of art that they do have connection to. They eventually name and they give it, and like it's the same as titling a work of a painting once you finished it with like Summer Evening by the Sand, or whatever you want to call it, some pretentious name. Like it's the same idea when you name a weapon. Like it gives it yes, it's got practical applications as well, but it takes like time, effort. It takes practice, it takes sensitivity. Like all of these things are perfectly viable in terms of art forms. Again, it's just that, and maybe this is where Magic's can kind of lean into more. It's that the idea of artificers creating something is as artistic as a performance. It's just much easier to conceptualize in a Magic card than it is for a dancer, right? So it's interesting because I mean, even I'm looking at Stormkiln Artist, which is one of the spoilers from Strixhaven, and it kind of falls into the bad side again of where it gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, and it's got Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. And even the artwork, it kind of just shows him harnessing an elemental, and the flavor text, a captured elemental makes for a potent, albeit unstable power source. None of anything in the card is particularly creative. I mean, I know it's create, literally the word is create a treasure token, but we don't see that in the artwork, you know what I mean? So it kind of almost falls back on that.
What's he using the power source for?
Are we just calling it an artist because it sounds good? And it's from Lorehold, by the way. It's not part of the Prismari, so maybe that's what kind of it shows the differences in their approaches to art. And I think obviously the Lorehold side will be a little bit more historical in a way. They might be a bit less flamboyant in the way they do things.
Yeah, they're like Indiana Joneses.
Yeah, so it kind of almost still demonstrates how you can still miss the mark by just slapping the word artist on there and going, well, yeah, is it? Did it need to be? And that's where that question maybe falls in.
I'm looking at a card called Psy Master Thopterist, which is a blue legendary creature from M19. And it's whenever you cast an artifact spell, create a 1/1 color Thopter artifact creature token with flying. God, cards are wordy. And then you do a colorless and a blue, sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. And the flavor text reads, industry without artistry is just a fancy way to fill the junkyard. And the Adam Paquette artwork shows a very sort of prim and proper looking, almost like if you imagine like a fancy watchmaker, that's what Psy looks like. He's got the glasses on the end of his nose, he's got a little like sort of chin beard, and he's working very delicately on a very small hummingbird looking Thopter. In fact, I think it might be a butterfly because he's got a couple of butterflies in bell jars. And again, I think I'll just bring it back. I just love the idea that you have artificers who maybe build war machines on other planes or build tanks or like whatever else, but on Kaladesh they're building art. They're sculpting living art. And I think, it's just a very, very cool way. Artistry is just a fancy... industry without artistry is just a fancy way to fill the junkyard. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, very cool indeed. I guess one of the... So we've touched on quite a few different ones. One of the ones I really wanted to look at was poems and poetry, because we're both wordsmiths in our own rights. We are severely underrepresented.
My God. Yeah, tell me that.
There are only 3 poets in the entirety of Magic, which, okay, fine, isn't like the end of the world, but when you compare it to the number of bards, the number of lyrists or lyrists, for fuck's sake. But then it's also weird that there's only 3 mentions of poem in Magic. When in Mirage, there were, let me just, as a point of comparison, because it's a bugbear for me, the Love Song of Night and Day, which is a series of flavor text that is in world, right? It's in the Magic world. They span across 11 different cards in Mirage and 7 cards in Visions. And within Mirage itself, there are 4 other songs presented in flavor text. So The Elephant Speaks, Rise on Wings, Iron Tusk, and Song to the Sun in various different cards. Noble Elephant, Bay Falcon, doesn't necessarily matter. But there's loads of representation of the word song across Magic. But you've only had 3 mentions of poem across the entirety of it, and that's the Kadamas of the North and the South Tree, and Mystical Tutor, which was also in Mirage. And they're the only 3 times the word poem is mentioned, and the only 3 poets you have are 2 poets, sorry, is Tragic Poet in its 2 different forms, which I think have their own individual flavour, and then Huatli, Warrior Poet, whose Planeswalker card does... Not only is it a white-red planeswalker that makes a green dinosaur, but I mean, none of her abilities have any avocation towards who she is and who we see her in the story, and the way that she presents herself as this eloquent, vocational person. But none of her abilities even kind of tied to that whatsoever, either her personality or her abilities, beyond, okay, cool, she can tame dinosaurs. It's like, well, yeah, but so can all of the Sun Empire.
Yeah, so her character, Huatli's a big bugbear for me in Magic. Not her character. I really like Huatli as a character. I love reading stories about Huatli. I think she was a cool planeswalker to introduce. We need to get way more of her than we do. And we've already had actually quite a bit of her, but we need more of her. I think she's great. But in the story, they made a huge deal of the fact that Warrior Poet isn't just like a job, it's like a title, it's like a rank that you have. She was the Warrior Poet of the Sun Empire, or she was in the process of being dubbed the Warrior Poet, because it's like, and you are essentially then the orator, the storyteller for the Sun Empire. So it's your job to relate and recount the histories and the great battles of the Sun Empire to the congregation, and it's a very well respected job to have. They made a big deal of it in the story, and then her cards have nothing to do with any of that. It's just she does dinosaurs, and she's had 3 Planeswalker cards, and none of them have anything to do with the fact that she's a warrior poet. And it was a bit of a letdown that mechanically she just didn't seem to gel at all with what she was meant to be doing.
Yeah, you're one of 2 cards in the entirety of the game that have the word poet in their title, and you don't reference it in the abilities whatsoever. And I think that's kind of where it was interesting looking through this and doing this kind of exercise, because it was a matter of, that's where one of the main ones that I was like, that's my problem. If you can't just put the word on top of it to make the card feel more flavorful, if you don't back it up with the mechanics, right? Otherwise it's not informed by anything. It's just a statement. You've got to accept it. Like, at least both Tragic Poets, both the or Antiquities, I want to say the original was in, and then the Dominarian one, they both have cool flavor text. Like, as much as Tragic Poet from Dominaria sounds like a tryhard, that works within the flavor of the poet, because poets are overly flamboyant. I mean, I've written things that I've read back and I'm like, God, I'm such a fucking twat. But it sounds good and it reads well. And I even like the idea of it brings back an enchantment, an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand, because mechanically an enchantment's less tangible, right? It's more of like, there are so many songs in Magic that are represented with verse counters, and they're enchantments that do a thing. Each turn you get a verse counter, and obviously there's song building, and then you remove all of the verse counters to get varying different degrees of effects. There are loads of verse counter cards, and I like the idea that Tragic Poet can go and get that all of the different verse enchantments. So I'm like, a song realistically, like kind of like Gaia's Anthem is a good example of this. It's the green color shifted version of Honor the Pure. Either way, it's an anthem effect for all your creatures. And I like this idea of where you sing collectively and it bolsters you as a collective. That idea that we talked about at the beginning about using music practically as a battle technique, right? But that's the only representation of a poet outside of Huatli, and Huatli has nothing to do with it. So it's very...
Well, there are 2 cards that I would throw into the mix. They're not explicitly poets. One of them is Tulane, Teller of Tales, and the other one is Burgi, God of Storytelling.
Yes. Yeah.
So not poems necessarily, but definitely vocal and spoken word artists. Yeah. Now, Tulane, fucking, what is he doing? That's that. For an artwork that's so great, by the way, and so evocative of what he's meant to be doing. Like, I suppose he gets you his stories, because he's a magical storyteller. Like, he's invoking the stories that he's telling, so he just gets you more beasts and more land, and it's like just value and value and value. I don't know. The storytelling's a bit weird there. Burgi, on the other hand, is a card that, even though it's only been out for less than a whole set's like cycle, is something that we've both spoken about on this podcast many a time, of being the fact that she gives you extra mana every time you play a spell. So every time you do a feat, you give her more fuel to tell stories, to help you do things, to give her more fuel to tell stories. And it's just this cyclical thing of her ramping up, the bar that she's in with mana and energy. And in the story that she's in as well, with Nico Aris, we see that her attitude is that you have to do things to be able to tell the stories of you doing the thing. So she incites a bar into a big bar brawl, and Nico goes, "Why the hell did you do that?" She was like, "So I could then recount the story."
Yeah,
of
so I
it
can go tell it
happening."
to people,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Why'd you do the
So
thing? So I can tell people about the thing.
yeah, so slightly malicious maybe and slightly
I
self-serving,
mean,
but then again, a
Scott,
lot
she's
of
a
great
god, right?
artists,
Yeah.
and a lot of great artists are.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah, I had her in her separate section specifically because I was like, this is such a good representation. And what I've said is that it's using pre-existing mechanics. It's not creating a new mechanic for a storyteller. It's taking the pre-existing mechanics and it represents not only this, and I put it again in quotations, the passion for storytelling. Because I don't want Red to fall into this, oh, we just put the word passion above it and it suddenly makes it a red card. But this idea of this verbosity, like it speaks mechanically from a Mel point of view. It informs, as we've been talking about for this whole episode, it informs the flavour of her performance. And it's one of the few times you see a performer on a card actually performing to an audience, and it's not your typical song, it's not your typical musician or your dancer, it's just a god talking. And yet still it has, as you say, it delivers that idea of performative expression so much better than a lot of the cards that show it, like, or should be much easier to convey in a mechanical point of view. Again, I don't know how you would create a performance mechanic if you wanted to like say that was something one of your focuses. Mary said, right, we've got this set, it's all based around like vocational jobs. What is our performer mechanic? I don't really know what it would be.
Well, I think they would figure it out. I mean, Strixhaven's got lessons. Do you know what I mean? Like they can figure it out. So I think whilst we've been speaking, I think I've just come up with a little theory as to why maybe a lot of these cards don't sit quite right in terms of our like maybe more modern understanding of what it is to be a magic mechanic and the way they approach flavor. And I think a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about and a lot of the cards that we've been talking about, it's none of the cards and themes are like the main theme of the set that they're going for, right? So, like Blood Artist or Bloodthirsty Aerialist, the vampires on Innistrad aren't. That's not their thing, you know. When we're talking about the lyrists on the multiple planes, there's a little bit of aspect of there's like music and harps in the aesthetic of Greek mythology, but it's not necessarily the main thing. So it's harder for them maybe then to make these cards fit within their own little thing because they're only going to do like 2 cards per set which have that theme, so they can't give them their whole new mechanic. Whereas now we see in Kaldheim, because I will include Kaldheim because you had the Skald dwarves, their whole thing was about storytelling, and you had a god who was all about storytelling. And now we're going into Strixhaven where 2 out of the 5 guilds are about performance and storytelling. They've made more of an effort to incorporate these ideas in a way that seems functional and flavorful. Like I know, for example, Impulsive Draw is going to be something which the Prismari are going to do. Like their MDFC Dean card, where you've got the blue and the red legendaries either side. The red one is essentially a stolen strategy effect. So it's this idea of you pulling ideas from everywhere and using the best ones to do the most important and splashy things, you know. And then you also have the blue side of that Dean. I haven't learned the names yet. Gives you a hone counter, so you cast something for a lot that's high mana cost. And then the more turns that go by, it sits in exile, and then you can cast it for a lesser mana cost later on. Because the idea is that you're practicing that spell to the point where you can do it very efficiently. Great. They're not individual mechanics. They're mechanics that we've seen with other things like Suspend and Impulsive Draw is already a thing. But they're making it fit for the way that you want them to fit. And it is a little bit like dressing up a mechanic, like how we said with things like the Rakdos. But it just seems like they knew they had performers, so what things seemed performative. They weren't saying, we need Impulsive Draw in this set. They said, we have performers in this set. What can we give them to make them feel like they're doing the thing?
Yeah, that's very true.
I think that's the difference.
It does feel like that. It's not an afterthought. It's one of the driving forces for their design as a school, right? Yeah, no, very, very good. I mean, I think the best representation, weirdly enough, of performing arts on a single magic card isn't even a creature. I think it's a land. Personally.
Is it Thespian Stage?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say Thespian Stage. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it just does everything. I mean, it's such a simple effect, and yes, you could argue that. I mean, again, I don't know what other lands you could get with. Vesuva makes sense because it's Flowstone, right? And it was the idea that the Vesuvian Queen, like with her with the host, she's transformative, right? But I just love this idea that Thespian Stage can be dressed up to represent any other type of land. I mean, again, this also plays into a little bit into Unstable because you've got what's his name, the Amateur Autor. who does the 4 different musical, like, Innistrad, the musical, and all of that thing. And I like the idea in my mind, in my headcanon, he's performing on a thespian stage.
Sure. So yeah, Thespian Stage is tap to add a colorless, and then you pay 2 colors to tap. Thespian Stage becomes a copy of target land, except it has this ability. So yeah, you're right. It's you're dressing your stage to be anywhere, like any other setting, and then you get the effects of that setting, like you're doing out the play. And then the flavor text is amid rumors of war, the third act of the Absolution of the Guild Pact was quickly rewritten as a tragedy. Now, incredibly flavorful card, brilliant, and I agree, it is the single best representation of the arts that we have on a card. My one gripe is that it was set on Ravnica, because there are so many other planes that would have been able to use this far better, or maybe a reprint. Why was this not reprinted in Theros Beyond Death? Because the ancient Greek society is considered widely to be pretty much like the birthplace of modern Western theatre. Like Greek
That's
tragedy.
Where the tragic masks came from, right? The comedy,
the chorus,
tragedy.
Comedy, tragedy. The way that Western theatre just scans, just completely to its core, is Greek theatre. And yet we saw fuck all of that in the Theros sets. Fuck all.
Yeah, my counterpoint to that is that Ravnica is a place that is aware of other planes, so it kind of makes sense that a Ravnican land could become an Urborg to of Yawgmoth. I think that's the only... Again, maybe I'm stretching, but I like the fact they did it on a plane that has more likely to have a varied selection of different places they could show. Whereas if, say, it was like in Theros, they don't necessarily know much about anywhere outside of Theros, so the land...
Well, I mean, I guess so. I think Ravnica in general is it like the Rakdos, for example, to go back to the Rakdos. A big thing of their whole identity is the fact that they satirize the news of the day, like especially in the latest sets. And there's the story, The Illusion of Child's Play, which was the Nicky Drayden Rakdos story. The first act of that story follows essentially a Rakdos review, like jury of the review, where it's the lead character is performing comedy that directly satirizes what the Azorius are doing. So that and theatre, and if you look at things like Shakespeare and theatre especially, a lot of it was satirization of the events of the world, even if it was very heavily layered with other stories going on and kind of rewritten tropes that they saw in theatre all the time. Things would be tweaked and changed to make it relevant to like the lives of everyday people, and that does feel very Ravnican. I guess I'm not upset it was printed in a Ravnican set first. I'm just annoyed that it wasn't reprinted.
We haven't
in
seen
other sets that could
in
have
other settings,
it, right?
I agree. I also like the fact that flavor text kind of hints at the political aspect of theatre. Like there were times where you couldn't put a performance on unless it was okayed by the monarch, or if it said the wrong thing, you'd get shut down. Like I do like that idea of where theatre responding to events that are happening naturally in the world. Like that is actually very clever, because that's one of the few. Like with the Footlit Fiends talking about stage hands, it's one of the few times that they kind of represent real life mechanics of theatre on the card as well, instead of just being from the fantasy setting. So that was quite a nice little nod as well. Again, it's a shame that the best representation is an inanimate stage object, instead of being
set dressing.
Like it's also, as you say, like when we get to the legendaries, right? Because this is as commander players, you might want to make like a theatre deck. And if your commander, either be it Tulane or Jury or Judith or Blim's probably your best option, right? In terms of actually having abilities that feel, and maybe again, even with Blim, you have to argue it a little bit because it doesn't necessarily feel naturally like a performing mechanic. If you have to kind of justify why your commander fits the theme, then that's already like a step back.
Well,
right?
I think as it stands now, you're probably actually better off going with something like Lazav or like a clone.
Oh, because he's like an actor, right? Because he could be anything.
Because you have lots of masks.
Or something like that.
It's something that I don't think we have necessarily time to jump into, but masks are also a huge thing in Magic, and whether that's like spies like the Dimir, or whether it's things like like Jester's Mark or Jester's Cap, and Jesters and Clowns there are represented in Magic as well. I know we haven't spoken much about them broadly speaking, but again they're not usually. It's usually that they just do something slightly odd rather than performative. But yeah, I think we're looking up. As I said, I think it's a symptom of these kinds of themes being maybe a little bit too tricky and a bit too wonky to fit into sets as a main thing, and so they just kind of fill the blanks world building wise onto what are otherwise just kind of just mechanically needed cards. They're like, well, we can't think of anything else to do with this card. We'll make it a Piper. We'll make it a Jester or whatever.
Yeah,
else.
absolutely.
Which is fair enough. It's very hard designing these games, and it sounds like we've just sat here and whinged for an hour about like, well, we're not getting what we want, whereas actually it's kind of impossible to do what we want because it's a very abstract thing. I do feel though that with Kaldheim, with Strixhaven moving forwards, they're still gonna have things like they're still gonna have a blue-red burn spell that does a burn thing in a performative way, and they still Mage Tower is the kind of sport of Strixhaven, if you like. And without diving into it too much because we're going to do it in world building, is essentially magical capture the flag, but with a bit of battle bond thrown in as well.
Yeah.
And so obviously they'll do it that way, and they have to make them combative. What I just think now is because it's the main theme of a set, we're just going to get cards that just feel, and that's what being a Vorthos is. It's about the feel of the card. They're just going to feel a lot more natural and a lot more representative of the arts, I suppose.
Yeah, well, when you've got cards things like Pop Quiz and First Day of Class, like you can tell they're doing like a bit more top-down aspect to it, and there's no way we get two whole schools that have our vocational preference, and we don't get cards that tick our boxes and make us go, yes, lovely, thespian stage level card, well done, good job, Wizards.
I think the idea of a top-down and a bottom-up set in terms of design, I kind of feel they're getting a little bit blurred. I do remember that Marrow on his blogger talk, someone said, is Strixhaven a top-down or a bottom-up design set? And he said explicitly it was bottom-up, which you wouldn't necessarily think because of the themes that they've kind of gone, right, we need the artists, what do the artists do? But I think what he was referring to is the fact that MDFCs were designed for Strixhaven, and that everything was built around the lesson mechanic as well. I sort of feel like the more and more that Magic design kind of evolves, the less important.
It matters. I completely agree. I think their approaches to the way they design the sets, their focus may be completely different, where it's like, no, we need these set mechanics in the set. How are we going to make a world around it? And then it's like, no, this is the world, what we're going to put inside it. Both of those aspects, once you get to the middle, because you have to get to the middle, have the same results anyway. It just depends on what the focus is. Like, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell looking back that Zendikar was a bottom-up set, because it has a lot of really cool, interesting ability. And I guess, maybe it's more of the Mel side because it is all intricate mechanics that work well. But from the world building in general, for Zendikar is one of the best of any sets. Like, everyone loved Zendikar before, they, bless them, they've ruined it. But yeah, I think it's as you say, like with the way that sets go and the way they're developing them, it becomes harder and harder to notice which direction it came from, because I think they find that middle ground regardless these days. Because I think that's what essentially sells to audiences, right? Is that feeling of representation, of naturally having affiliation towards. It's why they did the school system, right? Everyone loves sorting themselves into the schools of Harry Potter. Of course, they're going to love doing this as well. And if people were a bit tired of having to be like, oh, I like red black, but I kind of don't want to be a fetish cult. So it's like, right, cool. Well, I mean, obviously that doesn't work in Strixhaven because you haven't got Rakdos class.
No, I guess I like the performing arts, but I don't want to chop someone's face off.
Yeah, right. And now you've got people you can choose to go. They're like, oh, okay, I guess I'm more of a Prismari kind of person. Lovely. I didn't like the skulls and the chains and everything. So again, I think those lines do blur. It is an interesting topic we might have to look at in the future. But I guess seeing how sets have been built recently over the last year, I notice it less and less which direction they approached it from.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed our little sort of dive into the world of representation in Magic for the performing arts. I mean, we're not going to stop banging on about it because it's something that kind of trickles into just the way we approach Magic. But I think after Strixhaven, our kind of appetite for it will be a lot more sated than it was before Strixhaven and before Kaldheim. Nathan, before we dive into like doing the episodes around Strixhaven, have you decided what house you're going to be yet?
Yeah, I'm a Quandrix.
Interesting, because that's the maths plane.
Yeah,
that's the maths guild, and we've just spent an hour talking about how fucking actory we are.
Yeah, I know. The thing is, I come from like a grammar school background, so as much as I decided performing arts is way better. Hey, no, let me okay, let me finish. As much as academia is cool and everything, I found it really boring. Knowledge is only useful when you're using it for something practical. In my mind, that's my personal opinion, which is why I engaged so much with the creative arts, because I was able to practically apply the things I was learning and develop it all at once. So as much as, but the thing is, funny enough, I can't move my mind away from it. I love the ideas of fractals. I love the idea of systematic. I love shapes, like maths in nature. It comes down to like spirals and shapes and all of the natural ways that molecules want to form. That's really interesting to me, and that's what Quandrix is obviously kind of going to lean into. So yeah, it ticks my boxes quite a lot. Plus their color palette's beautiful this time around.
Yeah, I mean, it all looks great.
Yeah,
I think on Twitter I put out that 20-year-old Andy is a Prismari, but a 30-year-old Andy is a Silver Quill.
Yeah,
and I do think that's true. I think a lot of I think as the older I get, the more I realize that my sort of creative hum, if you like, definitely is more cerebral. Like I would be far happier nowadays, I think, standing up in front of an audience of like 50 people, sort of giving like a TED talk, if you like, than I would be getting up in front of 50 people and performing in a scene. But I think I'm definitely going for Prismari this time around, because I'm just ready for some really fun magic. A lot of my decks and a lot of my sort of play style can be quite sort of like spooky and a bit like Innistrad-y and a bit, kind of all the aesthetics are a little bit kind of grim fantasy.
Sure.
So I'm kind of up for having a sparkly Jin Dean with big ruffles in my deck.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And it's a very different approach than the science of the Is It, right? The idea of it being the complete flip side of it all being like lovely like, I mean, I guess Is It also creative, but yeah, it's nice for it to be a little bit more. Everything just feels a little bit softer in Strixhaven. I know that shit's going to hit the fan, but it's just quite nice to indulge in. Hey, a bunch of school kids just learning magic. Let's learn the spells together, guys. I think that's quite nice.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right, guys. Well, over the next few weeks, then, what we will be doing is we will be talking about Strixhaven, provided that the materials will be out and about for the world to see. So we will be doing our world building episode once things like the Planeswalkers Guide comes out and once more of the card set is revealed, so we can actually dive into what the world is, because although we're focused on the school, there is a lot more going on than just the school of Strixhaven, because Strixhaven isn't the plane. So we will kind of see what's going on there. We will then move through to do our flavor picks episode once the card gallery has been fully spoiled, and then we will do our story breakdown once all of the web fiction has been revealed. As of recording, it's just the first stories of the main and side story that have been released. Probably like last time, we won't be able to do all three back to back. There'll probably be a bit of a gap between the flavor picks episode and the story episode. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There are issues with the world building in Strixhaven, and there are some absolutely joyous things about the world building in Strixhaven, and we'll get onto that very shortly. Do you have anything else to say for this episode, Nathan?
No, I don't think so. I think no matter which school or which college you choose, I think you'll have fun with this set. So yeah, excited.
Yeah, for sure. Also, according someone messaged us on our Twitter when the trailer for Strixhaven came out, which is the kind of enrollment video, the cartoon enrollment video for new students. Someone said, "Oh, pizza is now confirmed on Strixhaven." By the way,
oh my god, actually, that's a good point. Fuck yeah!
For our menu episode, like we literally just out the blue, one of our listeners went, "They have pizza on Arcavio," and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. That's good to know."
Oh, that changes everything.
It does change everything. We don't know what kind of pizza it is. But whatever, we'll get to that.
We don't know about the metaphysics yet, do we? So, I mean, it could be... Yeah.
Guys, if you want to give us more tidbits on food from around the multiverse, because that seems to be becoming a bit of a theme of our episodes since a few episodes ago, then you can find us on Twitter at mtflavouring. Our emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is?
At the Fox in the Moon.
We have had another little bump of listenership and of reach recently, guys, so thank you so much for listening in general. If you are part of like our community on Twitter, I know we don't have things like Discords or whatever else, because quite frankly, it's just not quite time efficient for us to have those just yet in our development. But if you do want to reach out to us, if you want to chat with us, those are the best ways to do it. We love hearing from people. And if you're a new listener for this episode or the past few episodes, hello, welcome. We appreciate you very much. But all that remains for me to say, guys, is thank you so much for listening. This is Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.